There's a new boss in Washington, D.C., and President Joe Biden signs dozens of executive orders, but nothing on cannabis reform. A California credit union becomes a banking option for cannabis, and controversy about a Maine dispensary logo that regulators believe could appeal to kids. All that, plus the Jerry Garcia cannabis collection on Weed Talk News next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Every week, Ryan and I get together to talk about the biggest stories in the emerging cannabis industry. And this week, our top story comes dollars, and it employs close to 40,000 people, all who are now welcome to enjoy banking privileges at that same credit union. A good deal for all.
Well, Jimmy, speaking of billions, do you know who is number one in cannabis revenue in the U.S.?
Well, I'll tell you, I think it's either two, Curaleaf or Trulieve, one of those two.
Well, this is like who's the richest man in the U.S., Musk or Bezos. There's so much movement and valuations can turn so drastically. But what we do know is that Curaleaf has been holding that top spot for some time now. And the industry continues to mature, and we're only going to see more mergers and acquisitions take place, like in the case for Trulieve, making some big moves toward that big B word, billions. And for more on the markets, let's check in with Deborah Borchardt of the Green Market Report. Deborah?
Thanks, guys. On Tuesday, the Valens Company said it made the strategic decision to liquidate the majority of its cannabis oil inventories at market clearing prices in the fourth quarter of 2020. The stock fell over 10% on that news. The company said that the decision will lead to a related one-time financial statement impact in the fourth quarter between $9 million and $10 million. It was a big week for announcing capital raises. Harborside upsized its previously announced raise to approximately 27 million Canadian dollars. That's an increase of $7 million due to excess demand. Auxley Cannabis Group raised $15 million in a deal with ATB Capital Markets and Cantor Fitzgerald. Cannabis software company Blackbird and payment processor company AeroPay announced a strategic partnership to bring cashless payments to cannabis businesses for online ordering. You may recall Blackbird was sold in November by its parent company, Tilt Holdings. And that's the big news this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
It looks like Arizona is ready to open its adult use market this week, much faster than many in the industry actually hoped. Why? Well, that state is offering the already existing medical dispensary licensees the opportunity to offer adult use sales as well. 40 medical dispensaries had applied for adult use licenses in that state, and now Arizona is ready to give the green light. Interestingly enough, Rye, that isn't the first time, I believe, in the cannabis industry history that medical licensees got first crack at adult use licenses.
Well, there's always so much going on with these state regulators. And really, the next question is, what states are ready to move into the world of legal cannabis? We know New York, the governor Cuomo has been pushing for legalization in the state of New York, and they're entering stages of public comment for proposed legislation. And so I'm really excited because we have so many friends, Jimmy, in the cannabis industry that are attorneys that I know will be sitting in on some of these forums for public comment. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in New York. And Jimmy, for our main cannabis report, some more regulation fun. Seaweed Cannabis Company has been cited by the Office of Marijuana Policy for a violation relating to their use of a mermaid on their logo, and therefore causes concern that the logo could be attractive to children. And Jimmy, I know you have an opinion on this.
Yeah, first of all, we want to make sure that everybody understands. Now, they're probably looking at the graphic at this point. It's sea as in the water, ocean, SEAC, as opposed to the C in cannabis. So think about this, Rye. There are a lot of similar clauses in a lot of these state regulations because the regulators do not want these logos to appeal to anyone under the age of 21. That includes like statements and designs, images, including those logos. And that's what's been going on in Maine. Now, as we look at this logo, I see a mermaid. Okay, how many kids out there, you know what, and I hate to use the word kids because we're not really talking about kids. We're talking about people under the age of 21. And there's a big difference between someone who's 18 or 15 or 7 when it comes to parenting those kids. Now, for me, I like the opportunity to actually have a conversation with any kid about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. Oh, not cannabis, because cannabis is a plant. And that is a huge difference. And I know there are advocates out there always looking to make that distinction. Rye, I'm going to go out on a limb and think every morning, do you have a cup of coffee?
I do, every single day.
And do you know that 91% of Americans have a cup of coffee and use caffeine on a daily basis? And did you know that caffeine is a drug and it is addictive? Did you know that?
I did know that. Absolutely. It's concerning. I drink way too much of it.
And so do a lot of people out there. And everybody knows if you skip a day, if you miss out on your morning coffee or your afternoon cup of coffee, what kind of reaction in your body do you have?
Not a good one. I get very grouchy myself.
I get a headache. Okay. And that's kind of where I was going with that. So I guess my point is, I understand and respect regulations are important. Do I want cartoon characters promoting cannabis for adult use sales? No, I do not. I want to make sure everybody understands that. However, I do think that these are great opportunities for parents to have these kinds of conversations with their kids. It's always kind of awkward, right? Now, you don't know this because you're not a parent, to have that sex, drugs, and rock and roll talk with your kid. It's awkward for any adult. But this is a great time and a great opportunity in legal use states to open the door and start talking and communicating to your kids. Because if you don't educate your kids, and by the way, there's an assumption here that the adults in the room would actually educate themselves about cannabis, right? I mean, education drives all arguments, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, these regulations are not that different than what we have proposed in other states, Jimmy. In Massachusetts, very similar clause has been proposed and potentially put into effect, portraying or representing someone under the age of 21. And this comes from the tobacco advertising containing celebrities, endorsements, cartoons, everything you mentioned. And so it's interesting for those of you that look at this logo, you can decide what you think.
I don't know. When I was a kid, I did not dream about mermaids. Let's just say, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't. But I was an athlete, so I dreamed about sports figures, and I don't think sports figures should be endorsing cannabis for adult use. However, we can get into the fact that there are plenty of kids out there who have saved their lives through the use of cannabis directed by a medical doctor. So again, conversation, education, have those kinds of conversations with your kids. And as far as the regulations go, leave it to the regulators because you just can't fight City Hall, can you, Rye?
You absolutely cannot. You can't fight City Hall, but we can have our voices heard in our nation's capital.
That's right. And I bet you knew that there's actually been quite a few changes in our nation's capital over the last week as a new administration starts their business of running our government. Here is the DC Report with Vote Pro Podcast, Phil Adams. Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC Report. With the 117th Congress now open for legislative business, Republican Congressman Greg Steube of Florida has introduced the first new cannabis reform bill in the House. Unlike last year's MORE Act, however, the new legislation would not end the federal prohibition on cannabis. Instead, the bill would order Attorney General to reschedule cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act from a Schedule I to a Schedule III drug. The reclassification to Schedule 3 would protect federal employees who use cannabis. It would also remove many of the legal impediments to scientific research and would allow cannabis companies to deduct business expenses from their federal taxes. Such rescheduling is more in line with the views of President Joe Biden, who remains opposed to legalizing cannabis for adult use. In one of his last official acts as President of the United States, Donald Trump granted clemency this week to dozens of people convicted of nonviolent marijuana offenses. Last November, then President Trump received a letter from a coalition of celebrities, GOP officials, and civil rights advocates urging him to pardon or commute the sentences of 24 people serving time in federal prison, including several serving life sentences for cannabis possession. One such recipient is Craig Cecil, who, after getting the news in a call from Trump's daughter Ivanka, said, quote, "It feels like a new life. Just to know that I won't have to go back to prison is a huge relief." Cecil had been released to home confinement in June due to COVID. A Virginia Senate subcommittee on marijuana has approved amendments to the legalization bill put forward last week by Governor Ralph Northam. The bill would, among other provisions, allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis and to cultivate up to 4 cannabis plants for personal use. Approval by the subcommittee clears the way for the measure to be adopted by the full Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee. From there, the bill would likely be referred first to the Judiciary and then to the Finance Committee before moving to the floor of the Virginia Senate for a vote. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Pot.
Our next story comes from a chief science officer in Encinitas, California. Dr. Joseph Romahi is warning the industry about a virus that may have spread across the country. Sound familiar? The virus is known in botanical circles as hop latent viroid, HPLVD. He believes that the cannabis industry in California has been dealing with this since 2014. According to the doctor, there are many reports of dudding. Now, Rye, do you know what dudding is?
I absolutely do not.
That's why I'm here. Okay. Dudding is defined as stunted growth, a lack of trichomes, and a lack of secondary metabolites such as cannabinoids and terpenes. So here's the weird coincidence with COVID-19. It can be asymptomatic and it's not being tested by labs. Now, the doctor recommends cleaning harvest products with bleach. Now, that is not cleaning cannabis with bleach, okay? It is cleaning the machines that harvest the cannabis with bleach. Now, there is no report of the effects of this virus on humans, just the plants. Right.
Interesting. Well, Jimmy, it's been some time since we last spoke about the vape crisis back in 2019, and we're still learning about the risks of a lot of the ingredients that were in those cartridges. What we do know is that ingredients such as propylene glycol and phytol has been studied and published in the Inhalation Toxicology, a journal for international respiratory research. And this study has shown that phytol could be significantly more toxic. When this study was conducted on rats, the study had to be stopped when using phytol due to severe conditions, including death. Whereas the rats that show no adverse effects after 14 days of exposure to the propylene glycol. So this is very different than what we heard about at the beginning, where both of these could be potentially toxic and deadly. And we know that they both are very toxic, but we might be finding that only one of them is deadly, Jimmy.
Right. Know what's in your vape before you vape. That's all I can say. Ask for what the ingredients are and how it has been cut.
And now let's move on to our friend Solomon Israel from MJ Biz Daily International with our Canadian Cannabis Report. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canada's cannabis surplus is only growing larger. New figures show producers added more than 220,000 kilograms of marijuana last October when the outdoor fall harvest came in. That's about 50% more than the previous monthly record, which was set in the previous October. All that inventory could contribute to falling cannabis prices in Canada. Two major Canadian cannabis store chains are merging, continuing a consolidation trend in marijuana retail. Alcanna is spinning off its retail business, combining it with competing retailer YSS Corporation. The new retailer will have 53 stores across Canada, with more on the way. And Aurora Cannabis has laid off members of its internal sales team after hiring Great North Distributors to serve as its Canadian sales representative. The company wouldn't say exactly how many employees lost their jobs. Aurora has cut jobs and closed facilities in the past year as it reduces its production capacity. You can read those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel for Marijuana Business Daily.
Okay, we saved the best story for last. Since I got to hang out with the Grateful Dead members 1 week back in the mid-'80s in the state of Maine, I want to share the story about the soon-to-be-released Jerry Garcia Cannabis Collection produced by Holistic Industries in California. There will be 3 strains of flower and guitar pick-shaped edibles. With the blessing of the Garcia family, Holistic Industries is distributing this throughout their home state of California. The Garcia hand-picked collection will include a variety of strains like Chemdog, not to be confused with Remdog, SFV of Indica, and Fire OG, a hybrid. So, Rai, read the quote by Trixie Garcia, Jerry's daughter, from an article in Rolling Stone. This is great.
Oh, what a powerful line meant to honor her father's long-standing advocacy for legalization. And she's noting that the family wants to create a spontaneous and harmonious cannabis experience to bring people together in the way that only Jerry could. And she continued by saying that a joint became a bridge between him and those around him.
Hey, what a long, strange trip it's been, huh? Did you like that? That's a play on a lyric. You know that, right?
I do now, Jimmy. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll do it for another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.